I am Sarah, 34 years old, and the Chief Technology Officer of a company that is currently valued at $9 million. For the last 5 years, I have lived in the shadows of my own creation, letting my husband take the spotlight while I built the engine that powers his success. I am a woman of logic, code, and absolute precision. I do not act on emotion, I execute protocols. My husband. The boss smiled and said, "Congratulations, Sarah, you are terminated. Take your old laptop and get out. This $9 million company is mine now, and Melissa will take your place. The divorce papers arrive tomorrow." Security escorted me out as 20 employees watched in silence. I smiled back at him, knowing my hidden code would activate in exactly 10 minutes. The result would be their utter ruin. The sound of the heavy blue legal folder hitting the glass conference table echoed through the room like a gunshot. It was the only sound in the entire office. 20 pairs of eyes immediately dropped to look at their laps, their notebooks, or the polished mahogany floor. Anywhere but at me. I sat at the end of the long table, my hands folded calmly on the surface, looking at the man standing at the head of the room. James looked impeccable. He was wearing the navy Italian silk suit I had bought him for our anniversary last month, the one that cost more than his first car. He adjusted his tie, a gesture he always made when he was lying or when he was feeling particularly powerful. Today it was both. "I am terminating your contract effective immediately for gross negligence and failure to adapt to modern standards," James said, his voice projecting clearly so that even the receptionists outside the glass walls could hear. He tapped the slide on the screen behind him, which showed a downward trend in user interface engagement, a graph I knew he had fabricated just this morning. "Your coding methods are archaic, Sarah. You are holding Nexus Flow back. We are pivoting to a sleek AI-driven model, and frankly, your skills are obsolete." I felt a cold metallic sensation in my chest, but my face remained a mask of indifference. Obsolete. That was the word he chose. The irony was so thick I could almost taste it. The entire architecture of Nexus Flow, the proprietary algorithms that processed millions of data points per second, the security protocols that banks trusted us with every single line of code, was mine. I wrote the kernel in our basement while James was out playing golf with potential investors who never wrote a check. I debugged the server crashes at 3 a.m. while he slept soundly in our bed. He was the face, the handshake, the smile. I was the brain, the spine, and the heart. And now the face was cutting off the head. Before I tell you how I turned his $9 million empire into a worthless pile of digital dust, I want to know where you are watching from. Let me know in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been underestimated by someone who built their success on your hard work. James continued his performance. He was pacing now, energized by the silence of the room. He mistook their fear for respect. He mistook my silence for defeat. He did not know that I was not listening to his speech about corporate synergy. I was looking at the digital clock on the wall. 9 o'clock sharp. My internal server maintenance protocol was scheduled to ping the main database in 10 minutes. Usually it would find my biometric digital signature, verify my employment status, and continue running the optimized cycle. But in 10 minutes, when it pinged for my signature, it would find a termination flag instead. James had just triggered the one condition I had hard-coded into the system's DNA 5 years ago as a failsafe. "Please hand over your company phone and your access badge," James commanded, extending a hand. His palm was smooth. He had never done a day of hard labor in his life. Even the heavy lifting of building this company had been done by my fingers on a keyboard. I reached into my blazer pocket. I placed my badge on the glass table. It made a soft click. Then I placed the company phone next to it. I did not slam them. I did not throw them. I arranged them perfectly parallel to the edge of the table. "Is there anything else, James?" I asked. My voice was steady, devoid of the tremor he was hoping for. James blinked. He seemed disappointed that I was not crying. He wanted a scene. He wanted me to beg so he could look benevolent when he denied me. As a matter of fact, there is a female voice cut in from the hallway. The glass doors swung open without a knock. Melissa walked in. The click-clack of her designer heels on the hardwood floor was aggressive, a staccato rhythm of entitlement. She was holding a venti Starbucks cup in one hand and her personal phone in the other. Melissa was 26 years old, with hair that was perfectly blown out and a skirt that was technically against the dress code I had written, but no one enforced rules on the CEO's favorite new hire. She had joined the company 3 months ago as the director of marketing, a position created specifically for her after James met her at a conference in Las Vegas. She walked straight past the trembling HR director and stood next to James. She placed a hand on his shoulder, a possessive gesture that made the entire room flinch. The affair was the worst-kept secret in the building. They thought they were being discreet, but I had read their emails. I had seen the hotel bookings charged to the corporate account under client acquisition costs. I knew she was not just here to take my job, she was here to take my life. "I need the keys to your office," Melissa said, taking a sip of her coffee. She did not look at me. She looked at her nails as if I were a minor inconvenience she was scheduling around. "And I need the admin passwords for the social media accounts. James says I am taking over the branding strategy. We need to scrub the old boring aesthetic. It is too middle-aged." She smirked. It was a small, cruel twitch of her lips. She was weaponizing her youth, thinking it was a talent. She looked at James for approval, and he beamed at her. "You heard her?" James said, his voice softening as he looked at Melissa, then hardening as he turned back to me. "Give her the keys. Melissa is going to breathe new life into this place. We need energy. We need vision, not someone who thinks a pivot table is the height of innovation." I stood up. The chair scraped against the floor, a harsh sound that made Dave from accounting jump. I reached into my purse and pulled out the small brass key to the executive suite. I held it out. Melissa reached for it, but I dropped it on the table. She had to lean over to pick it up, breaking her pose of superiority for just a second. "The passwords are in the encrypted vault," I said, looking directly at Melissa. "You have the master key now. I assume a director of marketing knows how to access a standard encrypted server." Melissa flushed slightly. She had no idea what an encrypted vault was. She probably thought the cloud was actual water vapor in the sky. But she recovered quickly, tossing her hair. "I will have IT handle the technical boring stuff," she scoffed. "I am here for the big picture. Just go. You are making everyone uncomfortable." James nodded. He pressed a button on the intercom. "Thomas, please escort the former CTO out of the building. Ensure she does not touch any company property on her way out." Former CTO. The title hung in the air. I looked around the room one last time. I looked at the server rack visible through the glass wall at the back of the office. The blue lights were blinking rhythmically, a heartbeat I had programmed. They were processing thousands of transactions right now. They were humming with the life I had given them. Thomas, the security guard, entered the room. He was a large man in his 50s, a former Marine who I had hired 2 years ago. I had paid for his daughter's dental surgery last winter when his insurance denied the claim. I saw the conflict in his eyes. He looked sick. He looked at James with disgust, but he had a mortgage and a family. He needed this job. "I am sorry," Ms. Sarah Thomas whispered as he approached me, his head bowed. "It is okay, Thomas," I said softly, so only he could hear. "Do your job. Do not worry about me." I picked up my personal bag. I did not look at James. I did not look at Melissa, who was now leaning against the conference table, whispering something in James's ear that made him chuckle. That chuckle was the final trigger. It was the sound of complete, arrogant dismissal. They thought the war was over because they had fired the general. They did not realize the battlefield was mined. I walked out of the conference room, Thomas trailing a few steps behind me. The walk to the elevator felt like a funeral procession. The open plan office was deadly silent. People pretended to type, but I could feel their eyes burning into my back. I could hear the whispers starting. "Did you see her face? She didn't even fight back. James is ruthless." I walked past the server room. I paused for a split second, placing my hand against the cool glass. I could feel the vibration of the fans. It was a physical connection. Goodbye, I thought. We reached the lobby. The receptionist, a young girl named Emily, who I had mentored, looked like she was about to cry. She quickly looked down at her phone as James appeared on the balcony of the second floor, looking down at the lobby. Melissa was beside him, her arm looped through his. They were the king and queen of the castle, watching the peasant being exiled. "Don't forget to leave your parking pass." Sarah James shouted down from the balcony. His voice echoed in the high-ceilinged atrium. "And don't try to log in from home. Your access is already revoked." I turned slowly. I looked up at them. From this distance, they looked small. James looked like a child playing dress-up in his father's suit. Melissa looked like a shiny, hollow ornament. I reached into my bag and pulled out the parking pass. I placed it on the reception desk. Then I did something that confused them. I smiled. It wasn't a sad smile. It wasn't a bitter smile. It was the smile of a chess player who sees mate in 3 moves while the opponent is still celebrating taking a pawn. I checked my Apple Watch. 9:08. 2 minutes. I pushed through the revolving doors and stepped out into the humid air of the city. The noise of the traffic hit me as stark contrast to the sterile silence of the office. I took a deep breath. I was unemployed. I was about to be divorced. I was effectively homeless as far as the company apartment was concerned, and I had never felt more powerful. As I walked toward the curb to hail a cab, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a notification from my private server, the one James didn't know existed. Protocol Sentinel activated. Target Nexus Flow Core Kernel. Status license revocation in progress. Time to total system lockout 60 seconds. I turned back to look at the glass building one last time. Through the second-floor window, I could see James raising a glass of champagne. He was toasting to his freedom. He was toasting to his $9 million. "Enjoy the champagne, James," I whispered, "because in about 1 minute that building is going to be nothing but a very expensive paperweight." The cab pulled up. I got in and gave the driver the address of the only place I knew I would be safe, the office of the most ruthless intellectual property lawyer in the city. My brother-in-law, Marcus. "Drive," I said. As the cab pulled away, I imagined the scene happening upstairs. I imagined the moment the dashboard on the wall would flicker. I imagined the music stopping. I imagined the first red error message popping up on James's screen right over his smiling face. The countdown had ended. The game had begun. The revolving doors of the Nexus Flow building sealed shut behind me with a definitive whoosh, cutting off the climate-controlled air of the lobby. I stepped out onto the gray pavement of Manhattan. It was not pouring, but the city was enveloped in that specific kind of New York drizzle that is more annoying than a storm. It was a cold, pervasive mist that clung to everything, turning the sidewalk into a slick, oily mirror reflecting the brake lights of the gridlocked traffic. I stood under the small overhang of the building entrance, adjusting my blazer. It was a Saint Laurent piece I had bought 3 years ago to celebrate our first $1 million quarter. Now the damp air was already starting to seep into the fabric. I looked at the line of black town cars parked along the curb, waiting for the executives who still had their jobs. Usually my driver would be there. Usually the door would be held open for me, and I would slide into the leather seat, opening my laptop to check the server logs before we even hit the first traffic light. Today, I was just another pedestrian in the rain. I pulled out my phone to call an Uber. My fingers moved automatically, muscle memory guiding me through the app. I selected the destination, my brother-in-law's office in Midtown. I did not choose the luxury option I usually took. I selected a standard ride. I was practical after all. I hit confirm. The little loading wheel spun for a second, and then a red banner dropped down from the top of the screen. Payment method declined. Please update your billing information. I frowned, wiping a droplet of rain from the screen. That was odd. The card linked to the account was my Amex Platinum, the one with the limit high enough to buy a small island. I assumed it was a glitch. The signal in Midtown could be spotty. I tapped the card icon and switched to my backup, a Visa signature card issued by Chase Private Client. Confirm ride. The wheel spun again. Longer this time. Then the same red banner. Transaction declined by issuer. A cold knot formed in my stomach, tighter and heavier than the one I felt when James fired me. Getting fired was business. I could handle business. This was different. This was personal warfare. Suddenly, my phone buzzed in my hand. Then it buzzed again and again. It began to vibrate continuously, a manic rhythm against my palm. Notifications were cascading down the lock screen so fast I could barely read them. Chase Bank alert, joint checking account, ending in 8890 has been frozen due to reported dispute. City Prestige alert card, ending in 4421 reported lost or stolen. Account suspended. Wells Fargo alert investment portfolio access revoked. Contact primary account holder. I stood there staring at the glowing screen as the digital infrastructure of my life was dismantled in real time. James had not just fired me, he had coordinated a complete financial strike. He must have been on the phone with our private bankers for hours this morning while I was in the server room running diagnostics. He had likely used the fake divorce filing he mentioned to trigger a freeze on marital assets. I swiped up to unlock my phone, my thumb hovering over the banking app icon. Face ID recognized me, but the app did not. User access denied. Please contact the administrator. I let out a short, sharp breath that created a small cloud in the cold air. The administrator. That was James. He had changed the login credentials. He had locked me out of the money I had earned, the money that paid for the suit he was wearing, the money that paid for the lease on the building behind me, the money that paid for the diamond earrings I saw glittering on Melissa's ears. I tried to access my personal savings, an account I thought I had kept separate. But as I tapped the screen, I remembered. 2 years ago, James had convinced me to merge our portfolios for tax efficiency. He said it would simplify our estate planning. I had agreed because the logic was sound. I had looked at the numbers, not the man. That was my fatal error. I had debugged the software, but I had failed to debug the husband. The vibration stopped. The screen was full of red alerts. I was standing in the middle of one of the most expensive cities in the world, and I effectively had $0 to my name. Then a text message came through. It was from James. I opened it. There was no subject line, just a wall of text that he had clearly typed out beforehand and saved as a draft waiting for this exact moment. I have frozen the joint accounts to ensure you do not try to embezzle any funds before the court hearing. The lawyers advised me to secure the marital assets. Oh, and I also updated the security protocol for the penthouse. Do not bother going home to pack a bag. I will have your things boxed up and sent to your parents' house eventually. Good luck with the bus. I looked up from the phone, staring at the gray sky. He had locked me out of my home, the penthouse on Park Avenue, the one where I had installed the entire smart home system myself. I had written the script that controlled the climate, the lighting, and the security locks. I quickly opened the smart home app on my phone, connecting to Hub. Connection failed, device unauthorized. He had physically reset the hub. He must have had a technician waiting at the apartment the moment he fired me. He had planned this down to the minute. This was not a crime of passion. This was a calculated execution. I looked down at my feet. I was wearing suede pumps. They were already ruined by the wet pavement. I had no umbrella. I had no cash in my wallet because I never carried cash. I lived a digital life, and James had just pulled the plug. A yellow taxi splashed by, spraying dirty water onto the hem of my trousers. I flinched, stepping back toward the building, but the security guard inside, a new guy I did not recognize, stared at me through the glass with crossed arms. He had clearly been briefed, "Do not let her back in." The humiliation began to burn under my skin. It was a physical sensation, hot and prickly. This was what he wanted. He wanted me to stand here wet and helpless and cry. He wanted me to storm back into the lobby and scream so he could call the police and paint me as the hysterical ex-wife. He wanted to break my dignity before we even got to the courtroom. I closed my eyes for a second. I forced myself to breathe. In, out. I visualized the code I had planted. I visualized the timer ticking down. 7 minutes left. He thinks he has cut off my supply, I thought. He thinks money is the only currency that matters. He thinks that because he holds the checkbook, he holds the power. I opened my eyes. I was not going to cry. I was not going to scream. I looked at the map on my phone. Marcus's office was 40 blocks away. In this rain, in these heels, it would take me nearly an hour. But I had no choice. I was not going to call my parents. I was not going to call a friend and ask for a handout. I put the phone back in my pocket. I buttoned my blazer all the way up. I lifted my chin. I started walking. The rain was getting heavier now, shifting from a mist to a steady rhythm that drummed against the awnings of the storefronts. I walked past the high-end boutiques where the sales assistants used to greet me by name. I walked past the bistro where James and I had dinner every Friday night. I saw the maitre d' arranging the flowers in the window. He looked up and saw me walking in the rain without a coat, my hair starting to flatten against my head. He looked confused, his hand half raised in a wave that faltered when he saw the look on my face. I did not wave back. I kept moving. Every step was a reminder of what had been taken. My feet began to blister after 10 blocks. The cold water seeped through the leather soles. My laptop bag, heavy with the old MacBook they let me keep, dug into my shoulder. But with every block I walked, the coldness inside me solidified. The shock was evaporating, replaced by a clarity that was sharp and dangerous. James had made a classic strategic error. He had backed his opponent into a corner with no exit. Sun Tzu wrote that you should always leave a fleeing enemy a golden bridge because a trapped enemy fights with the ferocity of death. James had burned the bridge. He had taken the money, the house, the job, and the car. He had left me with nothing to lose. And a person with nothing to lose is the most terrifying thing on earth. My phone buzzed again. Another text from James. "Did you get my message? Melissa says hi. She is wondering if you want us to donate your old clothes to charity or if you will need them since you are unemployed now." I did not reply. I did not stop walking. I passed a newsstand. The headline on the business paper displayed in the rack read, "Nexus Flow poised for $9 million acquisition." I laughed. It was a short, dry sound that was lost in the noise of a passing garbage truck. $9 million. That was the valuation based on the intellectual property, based on the code, based on the system stability. I checked my watch. 5 minutes left. The water was dripping down my neck, now sending shivers down my spine. But I didn't feel cold anymore. I felt like a machine that had just switched to emergency power, efficient, ruthless. I reached the intersection of Fifth Avenue. The light was red. A group of tourists with bright red umbrellas crowded around me, complaining about the weather. They didn't notice the woman in the expensive ruined suit standing in their midst with a look of absolute destruction in her eyes. I thought about the joint savings account. There was $400,000 in there, money we had saved for a house in the Hamptons, money I had saved. James spent his bonuses on cars and watches. I saved mine, and now he had locked it. He was probably transferring it to an offshore account right now, thinking he was clever. He was a thief in a custom suit. But he was a thief who didn't understand the lock he was picking. I finally saw the building where Marcus worked. It was a monolith of steel and glass rising into the gray clouds. It looked like a fortress, and that was exactly what I needed. I crossed the street, ignoring the puddle that submerged my right foot completely. I walked into the lobby of the law firm, leaving a trail of wet footprints on the polished marble. The security guard at the desk looked up, ready to tell me to leave. He saw the wet hair, the ruined shoes. But then he saw my eyes. I did not look like a victim. I looked like a plaintiff. "I need to see Marcus King," I said. My voice was raspy but steady. "Tell him Sarah is here. And tell him to have the litigation team ready." The guard hesitated, then picked up the phone. As I waited for the elevator, I checked my watch one last time. 3 minutes. James was probably still laughing at his text message. He was probably ordering lunch on the corporate card. He was probably feeling like the king of the world. He didn't know that the countdown had almost reached 0. He didn't know that the woman walking in the rain wasn't retreating. I was just repositioning. The elevator doors opened. I stepped inside and pressed the button for the top floor. As the doors closed, shutting out the lobby, I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall. I looked like a drowned rat. My mascara had run slightly. My hair was a disaster. But I smiled. Because I knew something James didn't. I knew that in the world of code, rain doesn't matter. Appearance doesn't matter. The only thing that matters is who holds the admin key. And I had never given him mine. The elevator doors slid open onto the 45th floor, revealing a reception area that smelled of expensive leather and old money. The logo of King Sterling and Vance was etched into the frosted glass behind the desk. This was not just a law firm. This was a place where fortunes were protected and enemies were quietly dismantled. The silence here was different from the silence at Nexus Flow. There the silence was born of fear. Here the silence was born of power. The receptionist, a woman named Elena who had worked for Marcus for a decade, looked up. Her eyes widened slightly when she saw me. I was dripping wet, my Saint Laurent blazer dark with rain, my hair plastered to my skull. I was shivering not from the cold, but from the adrenaline crash that was beginning to set in. "Mr. King is in a deposition," Elena said, standing up immediately. "But for you, Sarah, I will interrupt him." She did not wait for an answer. She picked up the phone. 30 seconds later, the double mahogany doors at the end of the hall swung open. Marcus King filled the doorway. My brother-in-law was a man who commanded attention simply by existing. He was 6'3", a black man, with a presence that could calm a storm or start a war depending on what the situation required. He was wearing a charcoal three-piece suit that fit him like armor. He took one look at me, wet shaking, and stripped of everything I owned, and his expression shifted from professional detachment to a terrifying protective anger. He did not say a word. He simply walked over, took off his own jacket, and draped it over my shoulders. It was warm and smelled of sandalwood. "Come in, Sarah," he said. His voice was deep, a low rumble that vibrated in the quiet hallway. He led me into his corner office. It was a vast space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River. The rain lashed against the glass, but inside it was warm. He guided me to one of the leather wingback chairs and poured a glass of water from a crystal carafe. He sat on the edge of his massive oak desk, not behind it. He wanted to be on my level. "James called the bank, didn't he?" Marcus asked. It wasn't a question. It was a confirmation. He froze everything. I replied, my voice sounding small in the large room. "The joint accounts, the credit cards, he even locked me out of the apartment. I have nothing, Marcus. I couldn't even pay for the Uber." Marcus nodded slowly. He did not look surprised. He reached for a legal pad and a gold fountain pen. "He thinks he is being clever," Marcus said. "This is standard scorched earth divorce tactics. He wants to starve you out so you will accept a lowball settlement just to pay for a hotel room. He thinks you are weak." He looked me in the eye. "But he forgot who your lawyer is." Marcus stood up and walked behind his desk. He pressed a button on his intercom. "Elena, bring me the Nexus Flow Incorporation files from the archival vault, the physical copies, and get the forensic accounting team on standby." He turned back to me. "Sarah, listen to me. We will get the money released. A judge will grant an emergency motion for spousal support within 48 hours. But that is small thinking. That is defense. I want to play offense." He leaned forward, his eyes sharp. "Tell me about the code." I blinked, confused. "The code?" "The core system," Marcus said. "The engine that runs the company." "When did you write it?" I closed my eyes, thinking back. I wrote the initial kernel during my PhD program at MIT. That was 6 years ago. I spent 2 years refining the algorithm before I even met James. "And when did you incorporate Nexus Flow?" Marcus asked, his pen hovering over the pad. 4 years ago, I said. "Just after James and I got married." Elena entered the room carrying a thick, dust-free file box. She placed it on the desk and left silently. Marcus opened it. The smell of old paper filled the air. These were the original documents, the ones we had signed when we were young and in love and thought we would conquer the world together. Marcus began to flip through the pages with the precision of a surgeon. He bypassed the standard articles of incorporation. He bypassed the shareholder agreements. He was looking for something specific. "Here," he said, pulling out a document titled Employment Agreement. I looked at it. It was my contract. The one James had printed out from a template he found online because we were too cheap to hire a lawyer back then. Marcus read it, his eyes scanning the lines. Then he read it again. A slow, predatory smile began to spread across his face. "Sarah," he said softly, "when you founded the company, did you ever sign an intellectual property transfer agreement? A separate document assigning your pre-existing work to the corporation?" "No," I said. I shook my head. "We didn't think it was necessary. I was the company. The company was me." James said the employment contract covered everything. Marcus spun the document around so I could see it. He pointed to a paragraph on page 3. "Look at the language, Sarah. Read it out loud." I leaned forward, reading the text through my damp bangs. Employee agrees that any work created during the term of employment shall be the sole property of the company. I looked up at Marcus. See, it says it belongs to the company. Marcus shook his head. During the term of employment. Sarah, that is the key phrase. This contract covers what you wrote after you were hired as CTO. It covers the updates, the patches, the user interface. He paused, letting the silence build. But the kernel, the core algorithm you wrote in your dorm room at MIT 2 years before this company existed, that is considered a pre-existing asset. Unless you signed a specific document transferring that specific asset to NexusFlow, the company does not own it. I felt my heart skip a beat. What does that mean? It means, Marcus said, leaning back in his chair, that NexusFlow has been operating for 4 years on a license. An implied non-exclusive license that you granted them by letting them use your code. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the gray city. And what happens to a license when the licensor is fired? I asked, the realization starting to dawn on me. Marcus turned back, his silhouette framed by the storm. When James fired you this morning, he didn't just fire his wife, he fired the owner of the technology. Since there is no written contract transferring ownership, the law reverts to the default. You own the copyright, you own the source code, and by terminating your employment, he effectively terminated the implied license. He walked back to the desk and slammed his hand down on the file, the sound echoing like a gavel. Sarah, as of 9 a.m. this morning, NexusFlow is not a $9 million company. It is an empty shell. Every time their server processes a transaction right now, they are committing copyright infringement. Not just civil infringement. Because James knows you wrote it, and he knows he fired you, we can argue willful infringement. I sat back in the chair. The cold dampness of my clothes was forgotten. My mind was racing. He thinks he owns the empire, I whispered. Marcus laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. He owns the furniture, Sarah. He owns the lease on the office. He owns the logo. But he doesn't own the engine. He is driving a stolen car that he doesn't know how to refuel. Marcus sat down and pulled his keyboard closer. I am drafting a cease and desist order right now, he said, his fingers flying across the keys. But we are not just going to send it. We are going to time it. You said you have a failsafe? I nodded. The Sentinel protocol. It activates in... I checked my watch. 2 minutes. Perfect, Marcus said. When that protocol hits, his system goes down. He will try to reboot. He will try to bring in outside consultants to crack your code. And the moment they touch your binary, they are tampering with evidence. He looked up at me, his eyes burning with intensity. James wanted a war. We are going to give him a nuclear winter. We are not just going to sue him for half the assets, Sarah. We are going to sue NexusFlow for statutory damages of $150,000 per infringement. He did the math in his head. How many transactions does the system process an hour? About 10,000, I said. Marcus whistled low. That is $1.5 billion in potential liability. By lunchtime. He hit print. The sound of the laser printer whirring to life was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard, Sarah, Marcus said, handing me the fresh, warm paper. You walked in here a victim. You are walking out of here as the creditor who owns his debt, his company, and his future. I took the document. My hands were steady now. One more thing, Marcus said. Did he admit to the affair? Not legally, I said. But he paraded her around the office. Good, Marcus said. Because in the state of New York, using marital funds to facilitate an affair is considered dissipation of assets. We will claw back every dinner, every hotel room, every diamond earring he bought Melissa. We will add it to the tab. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a black credit card. It was a Centurion card, heavy and made of titanium. Take this, he said. It is a supplementary card on my account. Go to the hotel next door, get a room, get a warm shower, order room service, buy some new clothes. I can't, Marcus. I started to protest. It is a business expense, he interrupted. You are my client, and my client needs to look like the CEO she's about to become. I took the card. I looked at the man who had stood by me when my own husband had cast me aside. Thank you, Marcus. Don't thank me yet, he said, looking at his watch. The show is about to start. I stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, 40 blocks away, James was sitting in his office, feet up on the desk, thinking he had won. He had no idea that in this quiet room under the cover of rain, the legal torpedo had just been launched. "I am ready," I said. Marcus smiled. It was a smile that promised devastation. "Then let's burn it down." 40 blocks away, inside the glass-walled fortress of Nexus Flow, the atmosphere was euphoric. Or at least that was the performance James and Melissa were staging. According to the text messages I later received from the loyal members of the development team, the moment the elevator doors closed on me, the office transformed from a place of business into a frat house celebration of my demise. James had ordered a case of Dom Perignon, charging it to the company expense account that he did not yet realize was frozen. The popping of corks echoed through the open plan workspace, a sound that was supposed to signal a new era of prosperity, but would soon sound like the opening shots of a massacre. He stood on the raised platform overlooking the bullpen, the very spot where he had publicly humiliated me just 10 minutes earlier. He held a crystal flute high in the air, his face flushed with the intoxication of absolute power. Melissa stood beside him, draped on his arm like a trophy. She was holding her phone up, streaming live to the official Nexus Flow Instagram account. She had titled the stream, "New Leadership, New Energy." To the future, James bellowed, his voice booming over the nervous silence of the staff. To a company that is finally free from the dead weight of the past. Today we trim the fat. Today we pivot to speed, to aggression, to winning. Melissa giggled, turning the camera to face herself, checking her angles in the screen. She pursed her lips and waved to the viewers. "We are so excited to announce that Nexus Flow is entering its golden age," she chirped, her voice high and grating. "James is such a visionary. We are going to disrupt the market so hard. Bye-bye, boring old tech. Hello, revolution." She turned the camera to the staff, urging them to cheer. The employees, terrified for their jobs after witnessing my execution, managed a weak, scattered applause. The camera panned across the room, capturing the forced smiles of the sales team and the stone-faced expressions of the engineers. James took a long sip of the champagne, savoring the taste of what he thought was victory. He turned to the massive 90-inch dashboard monitor mounted on the main wall. This screen was the heart of the office. It displayed the real-time analytics of our client traffic, the server load, and most importantly, the revenue ticker that updated every time a client processed a transaction. "Look at those numbers," James said, pointing at the screen with his glass. "They are beautiful. And they are all ours now." On the screen, the graph was climbing. The green lines were steady. The system I had built was humming along, perfectly processing thousands of requests per second for banks, hospitals, and logistics companies across the country. It was a machine of pure efficiency. And then it happened. It started with a subtle glitch, a flicker. The green line on the revenue graph froze for a microsecond, then jumped, then froze again. It was a hiccup in the heartbeat. James didn't notice it. He was too busy reading the comments on Melissa's live stream. "Love the power move," James' one comment read. "Cut the cord, read another." But the engineers noticed. At the back of the room, Kevin, the lead systems architect who I had hired 3 years ago, sat up straighter in his ergonomic chair. He narrowed his eyes behind his glasses. He tapped his keyboard, checking the local monitor on his desk. "That's weird," Kevin whispered to the developer next to him. "Latency just spiked by 400%. James, Melissa called out, laughing. "Look, someone asked if we are hiring. Tell them yes, we need people who are cool and young. We are absolutely hiring." James grinned into the camera. "Out with the old, in with the..." The giant screen behind him flashed. It wasn't a flicker this time. It was a seizure. The entire display went black for a full 2 seconds. The room went silent. The cheering stopped. The champagne glasses stopped halfway to mouths. Then the screen roared back to life. But the soothing, professional blue and green interface of Nexus Flow was gone. The background was now a stark, aggressive crimson red. The revenue graph had vanished. The client list had vanished. The user engagement metrics had vanished. In the center of the massive screen, in bold white terminal font, a single message pulsed like a warning beacon. "Critical system error. Kernel license revoked. Unauthorized use detected. Contact the developer immediately. Below the message, a digital countdown clock appeared. 23, 59, 59, 23, 59, 58. It was counting down. "What is that?" Melissa asked, her voice dropping an octave, the fake cheerfulness evaporating instantly. "Why is the screen red?" "James, did you change the design?" James turned around. He stared at the screen. He blinked as if trying to clear a hallucination. "No," he stammered. "I didn't. What the hell is this?" He looked around the room, his eyes wild. "Who touched the server?" James shouted, his voice cracking. "Which one of you idiots touched the server?" Silence. The employees looked at each other, then back at him. Kevin, the lead architect, stood up slowly. He didn't look scared. He looked resigned. "Nobody touched it, James," Kevin said calmly. "That is a kernel panic. The system just lost its authentication key." "Fix it!" James screamed, slamming his champagne glass down on a desk. Wine spilled over a stack of invoices, soaking them. "Fix it right now. We have the biggest hospital network in New York running on that server." Kevin typed a few commands on his keyboard. His screen mirrored the big screen. Red. Locked. "I can't," Kevin said. "What do you mean you can't?" "You are the lead architect," James yelled, striding over to Kevin's desk. He loomed over him, trying to use physical intimidation to solve a digital problem. Kevin leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. He looked James directly in the eye. "I am the architect of the application layer, James. I build the house. I don't build the foundation. Sarah wrote the kernel. Sarah holds the encryption keys. The system is looking for her digital signature. It sees that her user account has been terminated." He pointed to the screen. "When you fired Sarah, you fired the license. The software thinks it is being stolen, so it is locking itself down. It is a self-defense mechanism." Melissa rushed over the phone, still streaming, though she had forgotten about it. The comments section was now exploding with confusion and mockery. Is this a prank? Did they just crash their own company live? LOL, looking for a job now. Melissa shoved the phone into her pocket. She looked at the screen, then at the router. "The internet is probably slow because of the rain. Just restart the router." She marched over to the expensive Cisco Enterprise router and yanked the power cord out of the wall. "Melissa, no." Kevin shouted, half rising from his chair, but it was too late. The office plunged into digital darkness. The phones, which ran on voice-over IP, went dead. The computers lost their connection to the cloud backups. The only thing that remained was the red error message on the big screen, which was hardwired to the local server. "See," Melissa said, plugging the cord back in. "Now it will reset." They waited. 1 minute, 2 minutes. The router lights blinked orange, then green. The internet came back, but the red screen remained. The countdown continued, 23:55:10. And then the sound began. It started with a single ring. The landline at the receptionist's desk, then another ring from the sales department, then 3 more from the customer support bank. Within 10 seconds, the room was filled with a cacophony of ringing telephones. It was a deafening, dissonant symphony of panic. Every single line was lighting up. James stared at the phones as if they were venomous snakes. "Answer them!" he screamed at the terrified support staff. A young woman named Jessica picked up her headset. She listened for a second, her face draining of color. She looked at James, her eyes wide with panic. "It is Northwell Health," she stammered. "They say their patient database is showing a copyright error. They can't access medical records. They are asking if we have been hacked. They are threatening to sue." Another support rep stood up. "I have Chase Bank on line 2. They say their transaction processing is frozen. They are losing $10,000 a minute. They want to speak to the CEO right now." James grabbed the phone from the nearest desk. "This is James," he barked. "Listen, we are experiencing a minor technical—" He stopped. He pulled the phone away from his ear, wincing. Whoever was on the other end was screaming so loud that even I would have heard it 40 blocks away. James slammed the phone down. He looked at Melissa. She was standing by the window chewing on her fingernail, her earlier arrogance replaced by a vacuous fear. "Do something," James hissed at her. "You are the genius who wanted to rebrand this." I don't know, code," Melissa shrieked back. "I do marketing. This is Sarah's fault. She did this. She sabotaged us. Call the police." James turned back to Kevin and the IT team. "Bypass the lock," James ordered. "Hack it. Break it. I don't care what you do. Just get that red screen off the wall." Kevin looked at his team. There were 5 of them, top-tier developers, people with degrees from Stanford and MIT, people who respected code, people who respected me. They looked at the red screen. They saw the elegance of the lock I had built. It wasn't just a password. It was a cryptographic puzzle that wrapped around the very DNA of the system. To break it, they would have to rewrite the entire operating system from scratch. That would take 6 months. They had 23 hours. Kevin looked back at James. "We can't bypass it, James. It is 256-bit encryption. It is military grade. Sarah wrote this specifically to prevent hostile takeovers." "I am not a hostile takeover," James roared. "I am the owner." "Technically," Kevin said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "the system disagrees." James grabbed a heavy glass paperweight from a desk and hurled it at the wall. It missed the screen by inches, shattering against the plaster. "Call her." James breathed heavily. "Call Sarah." He looked around for his phone. He realized he had left it on the conference table when he was popping the champagne. He ran to grab it. The office was in chaos. People were running back and forth with stacks of paper trying to switch to manual processing, but it was impossible. You cannot manually process millions of data points. The business was dead in the water. James dialed my number. 40 blocks away in the quiet leather-scented sanctuary of Marcus's office, my phone buzzed on the mahogany desk. I looked at the screen. James calling. Marcus looked up from his paperwork. He raised an eyebrow. I picked up the phone. I didn't say hello. I just listened. Sarah James's voice was a mixture of rage and desperation. "What did you do? The system is down. We are losing clients. Turn it back on." I took a sip of the sparkling water Marcus had poured for me. The bubbles fizzed on my tongue. "I didn't do anything." "James," I said calmly. My voice was smooth, contrasting sharply with the chaotic background noise I could hear on his end. The ringing phones, the shouting staff. "You planted a virus," James accused. "I will have you arrested." "It is not a virus," I explained, as if I were talking to a slow child. "It is a digital rights management protocol. You terminated my employment. Therefore, you terminated the license to use my intellectual property. The software is simply protecting itself from unauthorized users." "Unauthorized. I am the CEO." James screamed. "You are the CEO of the hardware." "James," I corrected him, "but the soul of that machine belongs to me. And since I am no longer an employee, you are currently stealing my property." "Listen to me, Sarah." James lowered his voice, trying to sound authoritative but failing miserably. "Stop playing games. Come back here and fix this. If you fix it now, I won't press charges." I laughed. It was a genuine laugh. "You won't press charges, James. You really don't understand the situation, do you? I am not the one who is in trouble. You have hospitals unable to access records. You have banks unable to move money. You are facing negligence lawsuits that will bankrupt you by sunset." I glanced at Marcus. He nodded. "Turn it on!" James yelled again. "No," I said. "What do you want?" James asked. His voice cracked. "Is this about money? I will give you a severance package. I will give you 6 months' salary. Just turn off the red screen." I looked at the rain falling against the window. "I don't want a severance package, James. I want you to look at that screen. Read the countdown. That is how much time you have left before the system wipes the data completely to protect privacy." "Wipes the data." James sounded like he was choking. "Standard security protocol for compromised systems." I lied. It wasn't going to wipe the data yet, but he didn't need to know that. Fear was my leverage. "You have 23 hours, James. I suggest you stop drinking champagne and start calling your lawyers. You are going to need them." I hung up the phone. Back at the office, James stared at his mobile device in disbelief. the line was dead. He looked up at the big screen, 23, 5000. The phones were still ringing. It sounded like a fire alarm that would never end. Melissa tugged on his sleeve. "What did she say?" Melissa asked. "Is she coming back to fix it?" James looked at her. He looked at the woman he had destroyed his marriage for, the woman who had unplugged the router to fix a server crash. Suddenly, she didn't look like a prize. She looked like a liability. "She is not coming," James whispered. He looked at Kevin and the IT team. They were watching him with cold, impassive faces. They were not scrambling to fix the code. They were waiting for the ship to sink. "Get out," James whispered. "What?" Melissa asked. "I said get out," James screamed, sweeping his arm across the desk, sending the champagne bottle crashing to the floor. It shattered, spilling expensive vintage wine all over the carpet, mixing with the dust and the debris of his collapsing empire. Every phone in the room continued to ring. The red light of the error message bathed the room in the color of emergency. The party was over. The hangover had begun. The clock on the wall of my sister's kitchen read 12:30 in the morning. Outside, the storm that had drenched me earlier was finally breaking, leaving behind a silence that felt heavy and absolute. I sat at the granite island, wrapping my hands around a steaming mug of chamomile tea. My sister Elena had gone to bed an hour ago, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the hum of the refrigerator. I was wearing a pair of her oversized cashmere sweatpants and a t-shirt that smelled of lavender detergent. The luxury suit ruined by the rain and the humiliation of the morning was crumpled in a trash bag by the back door. I felt clean. I felt warm. And for the first time in 5 years, I felt entirely untethered. My phone, which I had placed face down on the counter, began to vibrate. It was a harsh, aggressive sound against the granite. I didn't need to turn it over to know who it was. The vibration pattern was continuous, desperate. It wasn't a call. It was a demand. I took a slow sip of tea, letting the warmth spread through my chest before I reached out and flipped the phone over. James. I slid the green icon across the screen and put the phone on speaker, setting it back down on the counter. I didn't say hello. I just waited. For the first few seconds, all I heard was heavy, ragged breathing. It sounded wet and uneven, the breathing of a man who was on the verge of a coronary event. In the background, there was a strange, hollow echo suggesting he was still in the office, but the frenetic noise of the ringing phones had stopped. They had likely unplugged the entire system. Sarah. His voice was a slur. It was thick with expensive scotch and cheap fear. I could practically smell the alcohol through the speaker. He was drunk. Not the charming social buzz he used to cultivate at galas, but a deep, dark inebriation that stripped away his polished veneer and revealed the ugly, entitled core underneath. "I am here, James," I said. My voice was low and steady, barely rising above a whisper. I didn't want to wake my sister. I didn't want to disturb the peace of the house with his chaos. "You did this," he snarled. The anger in his voice spiked, but it was brittle. "You destroyed it. Everything. The screens are black, Sarah. All of them. The dashboard is gone. The client portal is gone. I have lawyers from 3 different hospital networks leaving voicemails on my personal cell phone. They are talking about negligence. They are talking about endangering lives." He paused, letting out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "Do you know what time it is?" he asked, not waiting for an answer. "It is midnight, and I am sitting in the dark in a $9 million office that is now worth less than the chair I am sitting in. It is actually worth significantly less than the chair, James," I corrected him gently. "The chair is a Herman Miller. It has resale value. The company without the proprietary code is just a liability waiting to be litigated. Don't you get smart with me," he shouted. The sound distorted on the speaker. I heard the crash of something glass hitting a wall. He was throwing things. He was tantruming like a child who had broken a toy he didn't understand how to play with. "I am calling the FBI, Sarah." I took another sip of tea. The threat hung in the air, ridiculous and desperate. "The FBI," James Thrish asked. "On what grounds? Cyber-terrorism," he screamed. The word exploded out of him. "You planted a logic bomb in our servers. You sabotaged critical infrastructure. That is a federal crime." I looked it up. I have the statute right here on my phone. 18 U.S. Code Section 1030. Fraud and related activity in connection with computers. You are going to prison, Sarah. You are going to rot in a federal cell for 20 years. I closed my eyes and shook my head slightly. It was almost painful how little he understood about the world I lived in. He thought that because he could quote a statute number he found on Google, he was a legal expert. He didn't realize that code was not just magic text, it was law in its purest form. James listened to me very carefully, I said, leaning closer to the phone. I am not a terrorist, and I did not plant a bomb. What you are experiencing is not an attack, it is a feature. A feature, he sputtered. It locked us out. It deleted the database pointers. Correct, I said. It is called Digital Rights Management. DRM. You know how when you stop paying your Netflix subscription, the movies stop playing. You don't call the FBI and accuse Netflix of hacking your television. You simply lost access to the content because you no longer hold a valid license. I am not a subscriber, he yelled. I am the owner. We have been over this, I said, my voice hardening. You own the brand, you own the marketing materials, you own the physical servers, but the intellectual property, the source code that actually processes the data that belongs to the creator. And the creator never transferred the rights. I let that sink in. I could hear him breathing, processing the information through the fog of alcohol. When you were the CEO and I was the CTO, I granted the company a license to use my work. I continued breaking it down into simple terms he could understand. That license was contingent on my employment. It was an implied contract. When you fired me this morning in front of 20 witnesses, you unilaterally terminated that contract. My system simply detected that the authorized user me had been removed, so it revoked the license. I paused. Whatever is happening to your screens right now is not sabotage. It is the software protecting itself from software piracy. You are the one committing a crime, James. You are trying to run proprietary code without a license. That is copyright infringement. There was a long silence on the other end. I could hear the faint sound of rain hitting the windows of his office tower. I imagined him sitting there, tie undone, shirt stained with wine, staring at a red screen that he was powerless to fix. Fix it, he whispered. The aggression was gone, replaced by a pathetic pleading that was somehow more repulsive than his anger. Just fix it, Sarah, please. I can't go to jail. The SEC is going to look into the books if the company collapses. They will see everything. Everything I asked, feigning ignorance. You mean the creative accounting you and Melissa did for the merger? He didn't answer. The silence was his confession. I can't fix it, James. I lied. Well, it was a half-lie. I could fix it. I could open my laptop right now, type in a 30-character command string, and the lights would turn back to green. But I wasn't going to. Why not? He asked, his voice cracking. Because I don't work for you anymore, I said. And I don't work for free. If you want the system back online, you have to buy the license. Buy it, he asked. How much? I will write you a check. I will give you $10,000 right now. I laughed softly. It was a genuine laugh of disbelief. $10,000. He really thought he could buy me off with the price of a used Honda. James, I said, you are losing $1 million an hour in reputation damage alone. The price of the license isn't $10,000. Then what is it? He demanded. What do you want? Half you want, half the company. Fine. I will give you 50% equity. We can be partners again. Just turn it on. I looked around my sister's kitchen. I looked at the magnets on the fridge drawings made by my niece. Simple, honest. I don't want to be your partner, James, I said. I don't want equity in a sinking ship. Then what? He screamed. What is the price? I checked the time. 12:45 a.m. The price is the full valuation of the intellectual property, I said. Plus damages, plus emotional distress, plus legal fees. Marcus is calculating the final figure right now, but I can tell you this much. It is going to cost you everything. The house, the cars, the offshore accounts you think I don't know about. There was a sharp intake of breath on the line. You know about the Cayman accounts, he whispered. I am the CTO, James, I reminded him. I built the security firewall that you used to access those accounts from the office network. I have every keystroke logged. I have every transfer ID. I have the dates, the amounts, and the beneficiary names. Melissa really likes expensive hotels, doesn't she? You spied on me, he hissed. I monitored network traffic for security anomalies. I corrected him. Embezzlement is a security anomaly. James let out a roar of frustration. It was a primal sound, a mixture of rage and defeat. You are a monster, he spat. I made you. I took you out of that basement and gave you a life. I gave you a title. And this is how you repay me, by holding my company hostage. You didn't give me anything. James, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly calm. I built the throne you have been sitting on, and now I am simply pulling the chair out from under you. I am not going to let you win, he threatened. I will hire the best hackers in the world. I will brute force your code. I will break in, and when I do, I will sue you for every penny you have. Good luck, I said. The encryption is 256-bit AES. It rotates keys every 60 seconds. If you try to brute force it, the database will interpret it as a hostile attack and initiate a cryptographic wipe. You won't just stay locked out. You will lose the patient records. You will lose the financial history. You will lose the evidence you need to prove you are innocent of fraud. I took a final sip of my tea. It had gone cold, but I didn't mind. Go home, James, I said. Go home to your empty apartment. Or go to a hotel, since I assume the locks at the penthouse have been changed back by now. Sleep it off. Because tomorrow morning you are going to need a very clear head when the federal agents arrive. What federal agents? He asked, his voice trembling. The ones Marcus called, I said. I didn't wait for his response. I didn't want to hear him beg again. I didn't want to hear him cry. I pressed the red button on the screen and ended the call. The kitchen was silent again. The refrigerator hummed. The storm outside had stopped completely. I sat there for a moment staring at the phone. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't joy. It was the feeling of a heavy weight being lifted, the feeling of gravity reasserting itself after a long period of weightlessness. I had spent 5 years making myself smaller so James could feel big. I had dimmed my own light so he could shine. I had edited my code, my speech, and my personality to fit into the narrow box of the supportive wife. But the box was broken now. I stood up and walked to the sink to rinse my mug. As the water ran over my hands, I looked at my reflection in the dark window. I saw a woman who was tired. I saw a woman who was alone. But I also saw a woman who held the keys to the kingdom. James was right about one thing. It was midnight, the darkest part of the night. But he was wrong about what came next. For him, the darkness was just beginning. For me, the dawn was already breaking. I turned off the kitchen light and walked quietly down the hall to the guest room. I climbed into the bed, pulling the duvet up to my chin. I closed my eyes and visualized the server room at Nexus Flow. I visualized the red light pulsing on the wall, a heartbeat of justice that would not stop until the debt was paid in full. I fell asleep instantly. And for the first time in years, I didn't dream of code. I dreamed of silence. The morning sun sliced through the blinds of my sister's guest room, a sharp, intrusive beam that felt too bright for the darkness I knew was waiting on my phone. I had slept for exactly 4 hours, a dreamless, exhausted collapse. But I woke up with the same knot in my stomach that I had gone to bed with. The silence of the house was deceptive. Outside these walls in the digital ether where I lived, my life, the war had not stopped. It had mutated. I reached for my phone on the nightstand. My hand hovered over it for a second. I knew what I would find. James was not a man who accepted defeat. He was a man who rewrote history until he was the hero. If he couldn't beat my code, he would try to beat my character. I turned the screen on. The notifications were different this time. Yesterday, it was banks and credit cards. Today, it was the world. My name, Sarah Vance, was trending on Twitter. Not for my innovation. Not for the $9 million empire I had built from a basement. I was trending because I was a villain. I opened the news app. The headlines hit me like physical blows. Tech terror. How a jealous ex-wife held a hospital hostage, the crazy woman behind the Nexus Flow blackout, source code sabotage, when domestic disputes turned deadly. James had been busy. He hadn't just called a lawyer. He had hired a crisis management firm. I recognized the style immediately. It was the work of Sterling and Hayes, a notorious PR agency known for what they called reputation defense, but what everyone else called character assassination. They didn't fight with facts. They fought with mud. I clicked on the first article published by a popular tech gossip blog. The photo at the top was a picture of me from 5 years ago, caught mid-sentence at a conference looking disheveled and aggressive. It was the worst photo I had ever taken. Beside it was a picture of James looking polished and concerned, a furrow in his brow that suggested deep manly burden. The text was a masterpiece of fiction. It claimed that I had been terminated for erratic behavior and mental instability. It claimed that I had threatened to burn the company down if James ever left me. It quoted anonymous sources who sounded suspiciously like Melissa, saying that I was obsessed with control and had installed the lockout protocol out of pure vindictive spite. She couldn't handle the fact that the company was outgrowing her outdated methods, the anonymous source said. She snapped. She decided if she couldn't run it, no one could. Now, innocent patients are at risk because one woman refused to take her medication. They were weaponizing my quiet nature, my intensity, my long hours in the server room, and twisting them into a diagnosis of insanity. I felt a wave of nausea roll over me. I threw the covers off and paced the small room. I was a professional. I was a scientist. I dealt in binary and absolutes, in verifiable truths. This was messy. This was emotional slime. I walked into the living room. My sister Elena was already awake. She was sitting on the sofa staring at the television with a look of horror on her face. She held the remote in her hand but seemed paralyzed. "Don't watch it, Sarah," she said, trying to block the screen with her body. I gently moved her aside. I needed to see it. I needed to know the enemy's position. It was a morning talk show, the kind that housewives watched while drinking their second cup of coffee. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Nexus Flow, Nightmare, the face of the victim." And there she was, Melissa. She was sitting on a beige couch next to James. But this wasn't the Melissa of yesterday. The arrogant, gum-chewing girl in the mini skirt was gone. In her place was a fragile, terrified young woman. She was wearing a soft pastel pink cardigan, buttoned all the way to her chin. She wore no makeup, making her look pale and young. Her hair was pulled back in a modest ponytail. She looked like a saint who had been mugged. "It has been a nightmare," Melissa whispered, her voice trembling. She dabbed at her dry eyes with a tissue. "I just wanted to help James modernize the company. I admire Sarah. I really do. I tried to learn from her, but she was so scary." The host, a woman with sympathetic eyes and predatory instincts, leaned in. "Scary how, Melissa? She would scream at us." Melissa lied, her voice cracking perfectly. She would throw things. She told me that she had eyes everywhere. She said she was watching me through the cameras. And then yesterday, when James finally had to let her go for the safety of the staff, she laughed. She looked me in the eye and said, "Watch me burn it all down." I stared at the screen, my mouth open. The audacity of the lie was breathtaking. I had never raised my voice in my life. I had walked out silently. I had arranged my phone and badge parallel to the table edge. James reached out and took Melissa's hand on the screen. He looked into the camera, his eyes swimming with fake tears. "I am sorry," he said. "I am sorry to our clients. I am sorry to the patients. We are doing everything we can. We have hired top security experts to break the malicious code my ex-wife planted. We will not let terrorism win." Terrorism! He used the word again. He was planting it in the public consciousness, associating my name with violence and danger. I looked at the comments scrolling across the bottom of the live feed. "Lock her up. What a psycho. This is why you don't hire your wife. Poor James. He looks exhausted." I felt the room spin. The floor beneath my bare feet felt unsteady. For a moment, the logic that anchored my world dissolved. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was the villain. I had shut down the system. I had caused this chaos. Millions of dollars were burning, and reputations were being destroyed. Was I just a bitter woman holding a grudge? Was I the crazy ex-wife everyone was talking about? I sank onto the arm of the sofa, burying my face in my hands. The weight of it was crushing. It was one thing to fight James in a boardroom or a courtroom. It was another thing to fight the entire world. They were stripping me of my dignity, my professional reputation, and my humanity, all on live television. "I can't do this," I whispered. My voice shook. "They are winning, Elena. Everyone believes them. By the time we get to court, no jury will listen to me. They will just see the monster James created." The door to the hallway opened. Marcus walked in. He was fully dressed in a navy suit, crisp and immaculate looking, as if he had already been awake for hours. He held a cup of black coffee in one hand and a tablet in the other. He looked at the television screen, where Melissa was now sobbing into James's shoulder. He didn't look worried. He didn't look angry. He looked like a grandmaster watching an opponent make a fatal blunder. He walked over to the television and pressed the power button on the side. The screen went black. The weeping ceased. The silence rushed back into the room, cool and cleansing. Marcus turned to me. He saw my shaking hands. He saw the doubt in my eyes. "Do you know what I see when I look at that interview?" Marcus asked. His voice was calm, deep, and utterly grounding. "I see a woman who is hated by millions," I said, wiping a tear from my cheek. "No," Marcus said. He pulled a chair over and sat directly in front of me, forcing me to look at him. "I see a defamation lawsuit that just added 3 zeros to the settlement figure." He tapped his tablet screen and held it up. It was a recording of the interview segment where James used the word terrorism. "This is defamation per se," Marcus explained. "He is accusing you of a specific federal crime on a national broadcast without a shred of evidence. He just handed us the gun, loaded it, and pointed it at his own foot." "But everyone believes him," I argued. "Look at Twitter. They hate me." "Twitter is not a court of law," Sarah Marcus said firmly. "Twitter is noise, and right now James is making a lot of noise. That is good." "How is that good?" I asked. "How is it good that the whole world thinks I am crazy?" Because Marcus said, leaning in, his eyes sharp with strategic brilliance, "The louder they scream, the harder they fall when the truth comes out." He stood up and began to pace, his energy shifting from comforting to commanding. "Think about it, Sarah. If he had kept this quiet, if he had just settled privately, he might have survived. But he decided to make this a public spectacle. He decided to drag the public into the courtroom." Marcus pointed a finger at the blank TV screen. "He just put himself on a stage. He turned all the lights on. And now when we release the evidence, the real financial logs, the emails proving the affair, the time-stamped server records showing you simply revoked a license rather than planted a virus, everyone will be watching." He looked at me with a fierce pride. "He is building a house of cards on live television, Sarah. And you are holding the leaf blower." I took a deep breath. The logic of his words began to seep through the panic. Marcus was right. James was overplaying his hand. He was so desperate to villainize me that he was making claims he couldn't back up with data. He was relying on emotion. I had the facts. "But the hate," I whispered. "It feels so heavy." "Let them hate," Marcus said. "Let them rage. It makes the payoff sweeter. Today, you are the villain. Tomorrow, when the transparency protocol releases those emails to the board of directors, you will be the whistleblower. You will be the hero who exposed the fraud." He handed me the coffee he had been holding. "Drink this," he ordered gently. "Put on the clothes I bought you. We have work to do." "What work?" I asked. "The system is locked. We just have to wait." "No," Marcus said. A slow smile spread across his face. "James just accused you of being mentally unstable and dangerous. We need to counter that narrative. We are going to issue a press release." "A press release?" I asked. "Short, professional, and deadly," Marcus said. "We are going to state that NexusFlow is currently operating without a valid software license and that the glitch is a standard compliance feature. We will invite James to purchase a lawful license at the market rate." He paused. "And we will attach the invoice." I felt a spark of my old self returning, the cold, analytical part of me that loved a good problem. "How much is the invoice?" I asked. Marcus checked his watch. "For the last 24 hours of unauthorized use, plus the reactivation fee, plus the premium for emergency support." He looked me in the eye. $9 million. I stared at him. That was the exact valuation of the company. He wants to own the company, Marcus said, shrugging. He can buy it. Again. From you. I stood up. The nausea was gone. The fear was gone. The image of Melissa crying in her pastel cardigan no longer made me feel weak. It made me feel focused. They were acting. I was engineering. I walked over to the trash bag by the door, the one holding my ruined suit. I picked it up and dropped it in the bin. I am not the crazy ex-wife, I said to the room, but mostly to myself. I am the landlord, and eviction day has just begun. Marcus nodded. That's the spirit. Now get dressed. The FBI isn't coming for you, Sarah, but by the time we are done with this press release, James will wish they were coming for him. I walked back into the bedroom to get ready. The sounds of the city outside the window seemed different now. It wasn't the sound of a mob coming to burn me at the stake. It was the sound of an audience taking their seats. James had wanted a show. I was going to give him a finale he would never forget. The laptop screen in front of me was the only source of light in the room as the storm clouds outside began to gather again. The digital countdown clock on my private dashboard was ticking away the final seconds of the 24-hour lockout. 10, 9, 8. Marcus stood behind me, his hand resting lightly on the back of my chair. He did not speak. He knew better than to interrupt a surgeon during an operation, and what I was about to do was surgical. It was an amputation of a gangrenous limb to save the body of truth. James was undoubtedly staring at his own screen 40 blocks away. He was probably surrounded by his crisis management team, the expensive lawyers, and Melissa. They were likely holding their breath, waiting for the timer to hit 0, expecting the system to simply wipe itself clean. They expected a data purge. They thought the worst-case scenario was that the patient records and financial history would vanish, allowing them to claim a catastrophic technical failure and claim the insurance money. They thought they could blame the lost data on my incompetence and move on. They were wrong. I did not believe in deleting history. I believed in correcting it. 3, 2, 1. The timer hit 0. The red screen on my laptop did not go black. It did not fade. Instead, it flashed white, a pure, blinding white. A new command prompt appeared in the center of the screen. Protocol transparency ready, awaiting administrator authorization. Execute. My finger hovered over the enter key. This was the point of no return. Once I pressed this button, there would be no settlement talks. There would be no quiet divorce. This was the nuclear option. I thought about the interview I had watched that morning. I thought about Melissa playing the victim in her pastel cardigan. I thought about James calling me a terrorist. I didn't do this out of anger. I didn't do it out of hate. I did it because logic dictates that an equation must be balanced. James had introduced chaos into the system. I was simply restoring order. I pressed enter. The click was soft, but the impact was seismic. On the screen, a progress bar appeared. It was green, the color of money, the color of envy, the color of go. Uploading data packets. 10% recipients. Board of Directors. Venture Capital Partners. Series A. Investors. SEC. Compliance Office. I leaned back in my chair and folded my arms. It is done, I said softly. What exactly did you just send them? Marcus asked. He was leaning in, watching the progress bar climb. He knew the broad strokes, but he didn't know the granular details. I sent them the truth I said, all of it. The transparency protocol was a feature I had designed 2 years ago, back when I first started noticing discrepancies in the budget. I had never activated it because I wanted to trust my husband. I wanted to believe that the missing funds were just accounting errors or bad investments. But I wrote the code anyway. I built a shadow ledger. Every time James or Melissa entered a number into the official books, the cooked books, my system recorded it. But it also recorded the real number, the raw data from this bank API. For 2 years, the system had been building 2 parallel stories. Story A was the fairy tale James told the investors, a company growing at 30% quarter over quarter, with lean operating costs and massive profit margins. Story B was the reality, a company bleeding cash, hemorrhaging clients, and sustaining itself on debt and lies. Now the system was merging the 2 stories. The email that was currently landing in the inboxes of the 12 most powerful men and women in New York tech finance was titled simply Nexus Flow Audit Discrepancy Report. Automated alert. It sounded boring. It sounded like a routine compliance check. But when they opened the attachment, they would see a side-by-side comparison that would make their blood run cold. I pulled up the preview of the email on my screen so Marcus could see. "Look at this," I said, pointing to the first column. "This is the revenue report James presented to the board last month. He claimed we generated $2.5 million in Q3. Marcus squinted at the numbers. And the reality I pointed to the second column highlighted in brutal, unforgiving red. $1.2 million, I said. He inflated the revenue by over 100%. He was counting projected contracts as signed deals. He was booking revenue from clients who hadn't even agreed to a pilot program yet. "That is securities fraud," Marcus whispered. "That is prison time." "It gets better," I said. "Scroll down to the user growth metrics." James had claimed we had 50,000 active daily users. It was the metric that justified the $9 million valuation. It was the number that got him the cover of Tech Monthly, the real number 5,000. He bought bots, I explained. I found the invoices from a click farm in Eastern Europe. He was paying $10,000 a month to have automated scripts log in and out of our platform to inflate the traffic numbers. He wasn't building a user base, he was building a ghost town. The progress bar on the screen hit 50%, but the financial fraud is just the appetizer, I said. Now comes the main course. I clicked on the second tab of the spreadsheet. This was the tab labeled Expense Reconciliation. This was the tab that would end his marriage to Melissa before it even officially began. You see, James was smart enough to hide the big fraud I told Marcus, but he was stupid when it came to his vices. He thought that if he labeled an expense as marketing or client acquisition, no one would look at the receipt. He forgot that I wrote the optical character recognition software that scans every receipt uploaded to the system. I pointed to a line item dated 3 months ago. Item, client dinner. Location, Le Jules Verne, Paris. Amount $4,000. I remember that weekend I said my voice devoid of emotion. James told me he was going to a tech conference in Ohio. He said the reception was bad, so he couldn't FaceTime. I clicked on the line item. The system expanded it to show the metadata. GPS location of user device Eiffel Tower, Paris, France. Secondary device detected on same Wi-Fi. Melissa iPhone 13. Marcus let out a low whistle. He took you to Ohio and took her to Paris. And he paid for it with the company credit card, I added. But look at this one. I scrolled down to another entry. Item office supplies. Vendor Hermes Boutique, Madison Avenue. Amount $12,000. $12,000 for office supplies, Marcus asked, raising an eyebrow. What did they buy gold-plated staplers? I clicked the receipt image. My system had captured the scan before James tried to delete it. It was a receipt for a Birkin 25 bag in Togo leather. I looked at Marcus. I saw that bag yesterday, I said. Melissa was holding it when she walked into the conference room to fire me. She was holding the bag that my code paid for. She was holding the bag that was bought with the money meant for employee bonuses. I felt a cold fire burning in my chest. This wasn't just embezzlement. It was a mockery of everything I stood for. I had built this company on integrity. I had refused to cut corners. I had worked 18-hour days to ensure our code was clean. And while I was debugging the kernel, they were shopping. The progress bar hit 80%. The email was now attaching the chat logs. This was the part that I had hesitated over for a split second. Was it an invasion of privacy? Perhaps. But these were chats sent over the company server using company devices. The employee handbook which James had signed clearly stated that all communication on company networks was subject to monitoring. He had signed his own death warrant. I opened the chat log file. It was a transcript of conversations between James and Melissa spanning 6 months. James, don't worry about Sarah. She is a workhorse. She doesn't have a clue. She thinks I am at a board meeting. Melissa, when are you going to dump her? I am tired of hiding. James, soon. Once the valuation hits 10 million, I need her to finish the upgrade first. We need her brain babe. Once she finishes the code, we toss her out and keep the cash. I read the words out loud. They hung in the air of the office, toxic and undeniable. We need her brain. Once she finishes the code, we toss her out. It was premeditated. It wasn't a romance. It was a heist. They had planned to use me, drain me of my intellectual capital, and then discard me like a used battery. Marcus looked at the screen, his face hard. "This proves malice," he said. "This proves conspiracy. This isn't just a business dispute anymore, Sarah. This is a criminal conspiracy to defraud you and the shareholders." The progress bar hit 99%. 1% left. 1% until the world knew who James really was. I imagined the scene in the boardrooms across the city. I imagined the phone vibrating in the pocket of the chairman of the board. I imagined him opening the email, confused at first, then frowning, then turning pale. I imagined him calling the CFO. I imagined the panic spreading like a virus, but a virus of truth. Status upload complete. Emails sent. 12 recipients. The screen flashed green once, then returned to the standard command prompt. It was over. The bomb had been dropped. I sat back, exhaling a breath I felt like I had been holding for 5 years. My hands were trembling slightly, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of release. "Now we wait," I said. We didn't have to wait long. 30 seconds later, Marcus's desk phone rang. It wasn't a normal ring. It was the priority line, the one reserved for high-stakes litigation and emergency motions. Marcus walked over to the desk and picked up the receiver. He put it on speaker so I could hear. "This is Marcus King," he said, his voice calm and professional. "Marcus, this is Robert Sterling." I recognized the voice immediately. Robert Sterling was the lead investor of Nexus Flow. He was the man who had shaken James's hand on the cover of Forbes. He was a man who did not tolerate failure, and he certainly did not tolerate being lied to. Robert, Marcus said, sounding surprised. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Cut the crap," Marcus Robert barked. His voice was tight with controlled rage. "Did your client just send an automated audit report to my entire firm?" "My client is currently conducting a routine security review of her intellectual property," Marcus said smoothly. Since she is no longer employed at the company, she felt it was her duty to ensure all stakeholders were aware of the current system status. Duty. Robert scoffed. "She just nuked the company. I am looking at a spreadsheet that says our revenue is fake. I am looking at a receipt for a handbag that costs more than my first car. Is this real? Tell me right now, is this data real?" Marcus looked at me. I nodded. "The data is pulled directly from the source code," Robert Marcus said. "It is the unadulterated raw log of every transaction in the company's history. If there is a discrepancy between this report and what James showed you, I suggest you ask James." There was a silence on the line. A heavy, pregnant silence. I tried calling James. Robert said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "He isn't picking up. His phone is off." "Of course it is," I thought. "He is running." Marcus Robert continued, "If this is true, if he cooked the books and used our capital to fund his affair, I am going to bury him." I leaned forward toward the speakerphone. "Mr. Sterling," I said, "this is Sarah." Sarah Roberts' voice softened slightly, but he was still on edge. "Mr. Sterling," I said, "I want to assure you that the underlying technology of Nexus Flow is sound. The code is real. The product works. The only bug in the system was the management." Sarah Roberts sighed. "You realized you just wiped out the valuation of the company. If this gets out, the stock is worth zero." "The stock was always worth zero, Robert," I said firmly. "It was built on a lie. But the technology is worth millions. And I still hold the keys." There was a pause. Robert was a businessman. He was calculating. He realized that James was a liability, but I was the asset. "What do you want?" Sarah Robert asked. "I want the truth acknowledged," I said, "and I want the board to make a decision. You can either back a CEO who is currently fleeing the country with your money, or you can talk to the person who actually built the engine." "I will call the board," Robert said. "We are convening an emergency meeting in 10 minutes. Do not talk to the press yet. Give us an hour." I looked at Marcus. He nodded. "You have 1 hour," Robert Marcus said. "After that, we release the press statement." Marcus hung up the phone. He looked at me and smiled, a wide, genuine smile. "He is gone," Marcus said. "James is finished. Robert Sterling just became your best friend." I looked at the laptop screen. The transparency protocol window was still open. It looked so simple, just lines of white text on a black background. But those lines had just toppled a king. My phone buzzed. It was a text from James. I picked it up. "What did you do?" "Why is Robert calling me?" "Sarah, answer me." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Then a second text came through. "Melissa just left. She took the car. She took the bag. Sarah, help me." I stared at the words. Melissa had run. The rat was the first to flee the sinking ship. It was predictable. It was pathetic. I typed a reply. My fingers moved slowly, deliberately. "I told you, James. The divorce papers arrive tomorrow, but the audit arrived today." I hit send. I stood up and walked to the window of Marcus's office. The rain had stopped completely. The clouds were breaking apart, revealing patches of brilliant blue sky over Manhattan. The city looked different now. It didn't look like a fortress that was locking me out. It looked like a grid of possibilities. I had lost my job. I had lost my marriage. I had lost my home. But as I looked at the sunlight reflecting off the glass towers, I realized I had gained something far more valuable. I had stripped away the lies. I had rebooted my life. And for the first time, the operating system was running perfectly. I turned back to Marcus. "Let's write that press release," I said. "I want the world to know that Nexus Flow is under new management." Marcus uncapped his pen. "What is the headline?" he asked. I thought for a moment. "Phoenix Tech," I said. "Rising from the ashes of fraud." Marcus wrote it down. "And James?" he asked. "What do we say about him?" I looked at the empty chair where a client usually sat. "We don't say anything," I said. "He is yesterday's news. He is a deprecated function. We just delete him from the code." Marcus laughed. "Sarah Vance," he said. "You are terrifying." I smiled. "I am just efficient, Marcus. I am just efficient." We sat down to work. The hour passed quickly, and when the phone rang again, we didn't flinch. We knew who it was. We knew what they wanted. They wanted the woman who held the code, and she was ready to negotiate. The morning sun did not bring warmth to the headquarters of Nexus Flow. It brought judgment. I sat in the command center of Marcus's law firm, a room lined with monitors, usually reserved for high-stakes corporate litigation. Today, however, they were tuned to a specific frequency. I was not watching the news. I was watching the internal security feed of my former office. James had revoked my building access, and he had fired me, but he had forgotten that the security cameras ran on a closed-circuit subnet that I had hardwired myself 3 years ago. I had not hacked into them. I simply never logged out. At 8 o'clock sharp, James was pacing in his office. He looked like a man who had not slept in days. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his tie was loose, and his hair was disheveled. He was shouting into his phone, likely screaming at another lawyer who was telling him that there was no way to stop the bleeding. The red screen of the transparency protocol was still pulsing on the wall behind him, a relentless reminder of his crimes. Melissa was there too. She was frantically shoving documents into a shredder. It was a futile gesture. She did not understand that digital footprints cannot be shredded. Then the show began. It started with 3 black SUVs pulling up to the curb of the building. They did not park in the visitor spots. They parked directly on the sidewalk, blocking the revolving doors. I took a sip of my coffee. It was black, bitter, and perfect. The doors of the SUVs opened in unison. 12 men and women stepped out. They were not wearing police uniforms. They were wearing navy blue windbreakers with bold yellow letters on the back. FBI. Behind them came another group, men in gray suits carrying briefcases. The Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC. James had threatened to call the FBI on me for cyber terrorism. He had wanted federal intervention. I simply ensured he got his wish. I watched on the monitor as the agents entered the lobby. The new security guard, the one who had stopped me in the rain yesterday, tried to step forward. An agent simply held up a badge. The guard stepped back, his face pale. He knew better than to argue with the Department of Justice. The team moved with practiced efficiency. They swept through the lobby and took the elevators. I switched the camera feed to the main floor. The elevator doors opened. The agents stepped out into the open plan office. The chaos of the ringing phones stopped instantly. Every employee froze. It was the kind of silence that usually precedes a bomb blast. Agent in charge Miller, a man I recognized from the news, stepped into the center of the room. "Federal agents," he announced. His voice was loud, authoritative, and brokered no argument. "Nobody touch your keyboards. Step away from your desks. Hands where we can see them." On the screen, I saw Kevin and the development team slowly stand up. Kevin looked calm. He even looked slightly amused. He knew this wasn't for him. He stepped back from his desk, crossing his arms, watching the justice he had prayed for finally arrive. Two agents moved directly toward the executive suite. They did not knock. They kicked the door open. I switched the feed to James's office. James jumped. He dropped his phone. He looked at the agents, his eyes bulging. For a second, I thought he was going to try to run. He looked toward the window, but we were on the 20th floor. There was nowhere to go. James Vance, the agent, barked. I am the CEO, James stammered. He tried to adjust his tie, a pathetic attempt to regain some shred of authority. "Do you have a warrant? You can't just barge in here. I know my rights." The agent didn't blink. He slapped a piece of paper onto James's chest. "Warrant for arrest," the agent read. "Charges of securities fraud, wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit grand larceny. You have the right to remain silent." James's knees gave out. He actually collapsed into his chair. It wasn't a figure of speech. His legs simply stopped working. The arrogance, the bluster, the threats, all of it evaporated in the face of federal indictment. "I did not do anything." James shrieked. It was a high-pitched sound like a frightened animal. "It was his wife, ask Sarah. She wrote the code. She is setting me up." He was still trying to blame me. Even as the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, cold and tight, he was trying to rewrite the narrative. The agent pulled James up roughly. "Save it for the judge, Mr. Vance." While James was being processed, I noticed movement in the corner of the screen. Melissa. She had been standing near the shredder when the agents burst in. Now she was inching toward the private rear exit that led to the service stairwell. She was clutching her oversized tote bag, the one she had bought with the stolen money. She looked terrified, but beneath the fear was a rat-like instinct for survival. She was going to leave him. She was going to run. She reached the door. She put her hand on the handle. I spoke to the screen even though she couldn't hear me. "Access denied, Melissa." The door didn't open. I had locked the electronic maglocks on all perimeter exits 5 minutes before the raid began. I had trapped them in the cage they had built. Melissa rattled the handle. She pushed against the door with her shoulder. She began to panic. She turned around and found herself staring directly into the chest of a female agent. "Melissa Davis," the agent asked. Melissa shook her head violently. "Number one, I am just the intern. I don't know anything. I was just leaving." The agent looked down at the bag Melissa was clutching. "Is that the bag purchased with misappropriated corporate funds on May 12th? The agent asked. Melissa clutched the bag tighter. "It is my bag. James gave it to me." The agent took the bag from her. "It is evidence, Ms. Davis. And so are you. You are listed as a co-conspirator in the indictment." Melissa screamed. It was a long, shrill scream of a woman who realized the party was over. She fought as they put the handcuffs on her. She tried to scratch the agent. It was undignified. It was messy. It was perfect. I watched as they paraded them out. The walk of shame that I had endured yesterday was nothing compared to this. I had walked out with my head held high, carrying my dignity. James and Melissa were walked out in irons, surrounded by agents with news crews waiting in the lobby. I saw the camera flashes exploding like fireworks as they exited the building. I saw James trying to hide his face with his shoulder. I saw Melissa crying, her mascara running down her face in dark, ugly streaks. I turned off the monitor. The room in Marcus's office was quiet. Marcus was standing by the door watching me. "Are you okay?" he asked. I stood up and smoothed out my skirt. I felt lighter than I had in years. The ghost of the man I thought I loved was gone. All that remained was a defendant. "I am fine, Marcus," I said. "I am better than fine. But we are not done yet." "No," Marcus agreed. "We are not. His lawyer just called. They want to cut a deal. They are asking for a meeting. A meeting I asked. He is in federal custody." He made bail, Marcus said. His parents put up their house. He is out, but he is wearing an ankle monitor. He wants to see you. He says he can explain everything. I laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound. He wants to explain. He wants you to drop the copyright suit, Marcus clarified. He thinks if he can get the company back online, he can generate enough revenue to pay back the investors and get the SEC to drop the fraud charges. He is delusional, but he is desperate. I picked up my purse. Set it up, I said. Are you sure? Marcus asked. You don't have to see him. I can handle it. I need to see him, I said. I need to look him in the eye one last time, not as his wife, not as his victim, but as the person who is closing the book. 2 hours later, I walked into the conference room at the precinct where James was being held while his bail was processed. It was a stark gray room with a metal table bolted to the floor. It smelled of stale coffee and despair. James was sitting on the other side of the table. He was still wearing the same suit, but the tie was gone, taken by the police, so he wouldn't hang himself. His shoelaces were gone too. He looked small. He looked aged. When I walked in, he looked up. His eyes were red and swollen. For a moment, I saw a flicker of hope in them. He thought I was there to save him. He thought I was the same woman who had fixed his mistakes for 5 years. Sarah. He breathed. Thank God. He tried to stand up, but the guard behind him put a heavy hand on his shoulder. Sit down. I sat opposite him. Marcus stood behind me, a silent sentinel of the law. Sarah, you have to help me, James said. His voice was a rasp. This is all a misunderstanding. The FBI, they have it all wrong. I didn't steal anything. I just moved money around. It is standard practice. I placed a folder on the table. It is not standard practice to buy luxury handbags with payroll funds, James, I said. And it is certainly not standard practice to falsify revenue reports to investors. He flinched. He looked at the folder. I can fix it, he pleaded. Sarah, listen to me. If you unlock the system, if you just turn off that red screen, I can get the clients back. I can make the money back. We can pay everyone off. We can make this go away. We, I asked. There is no we, James. Please, he whispered. Tears began to well up in his eyes. He reached across the table trying to touch my hand. I pulled it back. We are husband and wife, Sarah. Doesn't that mean anything to you? We promise to support each other, in sickness and in health, for richer or for poorer. I looked at him. I really looked at him. I saw the manipulation. I saw the selfishness. I saw a man who would drown me to keep his head above water. You broke those vows the moment you brought Melissa into our bed, I said calmly. You broke them when you fired me. You broke them when you tried to destroy my reputation on national television. I made a mistake, he cried. I was stupid, Melissa. She meant nothing. She seduced me. She made me do it. I shook my head. Even now, he couldn't take responsibility. It doesn't matter, James. The system is not locked because I am angry. It is locked because you don't own it, and you never will. I opened the folder. Inside was a single document. It wasn't a settlement agreement. It wasn't a plea deal. It was a divorce decree. James looked at the paper. What is this? He asked. It is the end, I said. Sarah, please, he sobbed. He actually slid off his chair and fell to his knees on the dirty linoleum floor. The guard moved to grab him, but I held up a hand. Let him speak. I am facing 20 years. Sarah, James wailed. 20 years in federal prison. If you don't help me, if you don't tell them it was a glitch, I will die in there. I am your husband. You can't send your husband to prison. I stood up. I looked down at the man who had once held the power to break my heart. Now he was just a stranger begging for a lifeline that I had burned. I picked up the pen from the table. I uncapped it. The sound was loud in the quiet room. I leaned over and signed my name on the bottom line. The ink flowed smoothly. Sarah Vance. No, I stopped. I crossed out Vance. I signed my maiden name, Sarah Sterling. I turned the paper around and slid it toward him. I looked him dead in the eye. My face was a mask of absolute terrifying calm. Vo Chong. You are asking me to help you because we are married. I paused, letting the silence stretch until it was almost unbearable. Shin Loy James. My definition of husband does not include a federal inmate. I capped the pen. Goodbye, James. I turned and walked toward the door. Sarah. He screamed behind me. Sarah, come back. You can't leave me here. I didn't look back. I walked out of the room past the guard, past the lawyers, and into the hallway where Marcus was waiting. Did he sign? Marcus asked. He will, I said. He has no choice. It is the only asset he has left to trade. We walked out of the precinct and into the afternoon sun. The air was fresh. The city was alive. I took a deep breath. What now? Marcus asked. Now, I said, looking at the skyline. Now I go to the auction. I have a company to buy back. And as I walked down the steps of the police station, I didn't feel like a woman who had just divorced her husband. I felt like a queen who had just executed a traitor. The reign of James was over. The era of Sarah had begun. The federal bankruptcy court in Lower Manhattan smells of floor wax and stale ambition. It is a place where dreams go to die, where empires are reduced to line items on a spreadsheet, and where vultures circle to pick the bones of failed enterprises. 3 months ago, I would have been terrified to walk into a room like this. I would have felt the weight of failure crushing me. But today, walking down the center aisle in a bespoke cream-colored suit that cost more than my first car, I did not feel like a failure. I felt like a predator. I sat in the second row next to Marcus. He was relaxed, scrolling through emails on his tablet, looking entirely bored. The room was sparsely populated. Most of the interested parties were liquidators' men who bought office furniture by the pound and sold servers for scrap metal. They were here for the chairs, the desks, and the monitors. They were not here for the soul of the company. They knew that Nexus Flow was a toxic asset. The press had been relentless. The brand was radioactive. Without the software license, the company was just a collection of used electronics in a rented office. The auctioneer, a man with a droning, monotonous voice, began reading the lot number for the assets of Nexus Flow Incorporated. Lot 404. The irony of the error code number was not lost on me. Opening bid for the physical assets and brand trademarks of Nexus Flow starting at $10,000. A man in a gray windbreaker raised a paddle. 15,000, another man countered. They were bidding on the computers. They were bidding on the Herman Miller chairs. They had no idea that the real value was sitting in the second row waiting. I leaned over to Marcus. Now, I whispered. Not yet. Marcus whispered back, not looking up. Let them fight over the scraps. We want the silence. The bidding stalled at $45,000. The auctioneer looked around the room, gavel poised. 45,000 going once, going twice. 50,000, Marcus said, clearly raising his paddle. The room turned to look at us. The liquidators glared. 50,000 was too high for used equipment. There was no profit margin left for them. They lowered their paddles. They didn't know I wasn't buying the equipment for resale. I was buying my throne back. Any other bids? The auctioneer asked. Silence. Sold to bidder number 7 for $50,000. The gavel struck the wood. It was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. It was the sound of a $9 million illusion collapsing into reality. For the price of a mid-range luxury sedan, I had just purchased the entire infrastructure of the company James had tried to steal from me. I stood up and shook Marcus's hand. We walked to the clerk's desk to cut the check. It was drawn from my personal account, the one James had tried to freeze, now fully unlocked and padded with the settlement money from the defamation lawsuit. 2 days later, I stood in the lobby of the building. The Nexus Flow sign had already been removed from the wall, leaving a ghost outline of dust where the letters used to be. The security guard Thomas, the one who had walked me out with such sadness in his eyes, was standing at the desk. When he saw me walk through the revolving doors, his jaw dropped. "Ms. Sarah," he stammered. I heard the company was gone." "The company is gone, Thomas," I said, stopping at the desk. I placed a new employee badge on the counter. It was sleek, black, and bore a new logo, a stylized bird rising from flames. "But the building is under new management," I continued, "and I am going to need a head of security I can trust. Are you available?" Thomas looked at the badge. He looked at me. He smiled a genuine, relieved smile that reached his eyes. "I am available, ma'am." I took the elevator up to the 20th floor alone. The office was eerie. Papers were still scattered on the desks from the day of the raid. Coffee cups with mold growing in them sat next to keyboards. It looked like the crew of a ship had vanished into thin air. I walked to the center of the room. I clapped my hands once. The sound echoed in the silence. Then I pulled out my phone and dialed a group number. "Kevin," I said when the line connected. "It is Sarah." Sarah Kevin's voice was breathless. "We heard you bought the assets. Is it true?" "It is true," I said. "Get the team, get the developers, get the support staff. Not the sales guys who laughed at James's jokes, just the people who did the work. Meet me here in an hour." "What are we going to do?" Kevin asked. "The servers are wiped. The code is gone." I walked over to the server room. I placed my hand on the biometric scanner. It flashed red, denying me access because the system was still offline. I pulled a small USB drive from my pocket. It contained the encryption key, the only key in existence. "The code isn't gone, Kevin," I said softly. "It was just sleeping. Come back to work. We have a launch to prepare for." By noon, the office was buzzing. It wasn't the chaotic, fearful buzzing of the James era. It was the focused electric hum of productivity. I stood on the raised platform looking out at the faces of the 30 people I had rehired. They looked tired, they looked wary, but they also looked hopeful. I cleared my throat. "Welcome back," I said. My voice was steady. It didn't boom like James's. It didn't need to. As of this morning, Nexus Flow no longer exists. That name is associated with fraud, with failure, and with leadership that didn't deserve your talent. I pointed to the large screen behind me. I had already rebooted the system. The red error message was gone. In its place was a clean white screen with the new logo I had designed the night before. "Welcome to Phoenix Tech," I announced. The room erupted. It wasn't polite applause. It was cheering. It was the sound of people who had been held hostage by incompetence and were finally free. "We are going to do things differently this time," I continued. "No cooked books, no fake metrics, no ego. We are going to build the best secure data platform in the world, and we are going to do it with integrity. And one more thing." I looked at Kevin. "Every employee here gets equity, real equity, vested immediately. This is our company." Kevin took off his glasses and wiped his eyes. "Now," I said, clapping my hands again, "let's get to work." I walked into my new office. It was the same room James had occupied, but I had already ordered the cleaners to strip it bare. The expensive leather couch was gone. The wet bar was gone. The golf putter was gone. I had replaced the massive mahogany desk with a simple standing desk made of reclaimed wood. I sat down and opened my laptop. The dashboard was green. The transactions were flowing again. The clients, once they heard I was back in charge, had returned almost immediately. They trusted the architect, not the salesman. I checked the revenue ticker. In the first hour of operation, Phoenix Tech had generated $50,000. I had already made back my initial investment. I leaned back in my chair and looked out at the city skyline. The storm had passed days ago, but the clarity it left behind remained. I had walked through fire, and I hadn't just survived. I had evolved. My phone buzzed with a news alert. It was the closure I needed. James Vance sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. I clicked the article. The photo showed James leaving the courthouse in handcuffs. He looked gaunt. He looked older. The article detailed the plea deal. He had pleaded guilty to all charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. He would be serving his time in a medium security facility in upstate New York. He would be eligible for parole in 5 years, but his career was over. He was permanently barred from serving as an officer of any public company. He was bankrupt, disgraced, and alone. And Melissa. The article mentioned her briefly at the end. Melissa Davis, a co-conspirator, received a suspended sentence in exchange for testifying against Vance. However, sources say she has been blacklisted from every major marketing firm in the city. I closed the browser tab. I didn't feel happy. I didn't feel sad. I just felt a profound sense of balance. The equation was resolved. The variables had been sorted. I stood up and walked to the window. I held a cup of coffee in my hand, the warmth seeping into my palms. Below me, the yellow taxis looked like beetles scurrying through the grid. Somewhere down there, life was messy and chaotic. But up here in the Empire, I had built, lost, and reconquered. Everything was precise. I took a sip of coffee. It tasted like victory. I had turned his $9 million lie into my honest empire. I had proven that you cannot build a castle on a foundation of sand, and you certainly cannot build a tech company if you don't own the code. They had underestimated me because I was quiet. They had underestimated me because I was a woman. They thought I was just the wife, the accessory, the background noise. They forgot that the background is where the operating system lives. I turned away from the window and looked at the blinking lights of the server room. "Protocol complete," I whispered to the empty room. I sat back down at my desk and began to code. I had turned the $9 million valuation of a fraudster into a legacy that was entirely my own. The best part wasn't the money. It wasn't the title. It was the look on James's face when he realized that without me, he was nothing. What was your favorite moment of this takedown? Was it when the red screen of death appeared during his party? Was it when James was led away in handcuffs? Or was it when Melissa realized her designer bag was actually evidence? Let me know in the comments below. And if you believe that intelligence is the ultimate weapon, hit that like button and subscribe. I am Sarah, and this is Phoenix Tech. We are just getting started.